The Battle of Stalingrad, Frozen Inferno. Chapter 1. The City on the Volga. In the summer of 1942, the war that had already engulfed Europe turned its fury toward a single city on the banks of the Volga River, Stalingrad. It was an industrial heart of the Soviet Union, a vast complex of factories, fineries, and workers' housing that stretched along the water like a scar of smoke and steel. To Hitler, it was more than a name on a map. It was a symbol. To conquer the city bearing Stalin's name would strike at the heart of Soviet pride and power. The German army, victorious in the west and advancing deep into Soviet lands, turned south after the failed assault on Moscow. Army Group South, led by Field Marshal Friedrich Paulus, was ordered to capture the oil fields of the Caucasus, and Stalingrad stood in the way. By August, German bombers filled the skies above the Volga. The first raids began with terrifying precision. Entire districts were reduced to rubble. The wooden houses burned first, then the factories, then the people trapped between. The city that had once produced steel and weapons now produced only smoke. From the east, across the wide Volga River, reinforcements poured in. Soviet soldiers ferried under constant bombardment. The Red Army, under General Vasily Chuikov in the command of General Zhukov in Moscow, swore that Stalingrad would not fall. For the Soviets, this was not merely a city, it was the line between survival and oblivion. By late August, the German Sixth Army reached the city's outskirts. Columns of tanks and infantry rolled across the steppe, their engines drowning out the cries of refugees fleeing east. They expected an easy victory, another swift conquest like Kiev or Smolensk. But Stalingrad was no ordinary city. It was already half destroyed, and in that chaos the defenders found a fortress. As the Germans advanced into the ruins, the battle changed. The open fields of blitzkrieg gave way to street fighting, house by house, floor by floor, room by room. The Germans called it Rattenkrieg, the Rat War. Buildings changed hands several times a day. Every pile of bricks became a battlefield. Every basement became a bunker. The factories, the Red October barricadi and tractor works, became fortresses of concrete and smoke. Inside, soldiers fought with grenades, knives, and bare hands. The air was thick with dust and blood. The Volga ferries continued through shell fire, carrying ammunition and wounded men. The river turned red under the reflection of burning oil tanks. By September, the Germans had taken most of the city, but the Soviets refused to yield. Small pockets of resistance clung to the riverbank. German commanders believed victory was near. They had captured 90% of Stalingrad, but the last 10% would devour them. Chapter 2. The siege begins. Autumn came, and the city's ruins became a maze of death. The front lines blurred. There was no longer a clear battlefield, only endless rubble, craters, and shattered walls. Soldiers lived underground, among corpses and rats, emerging only to fight and die. Every day began the same way, a bombardment that shook the earth. German artillery rained fire on the Soviet positions, and Soviet mortars replied from across the river. The sounds never stopped, the smoke never cleared. Inside the ruins, survival was reduced to inches. Snipers watched through shattered windows, killing at the slightest movement. Streets that once led to factories now ended in rubble heaps. The Pavlov house, a single apartment block, became a symbol of defiance, held by a handful of Soviet soldiers who withstood constant assaults for weeks. The Germans, though stronger in weapons, found themselves trapped in a nightmare. Supply lines stretched thin across the endless steppe. Soviet counterattacks harassed their flanks, the Volga froze, and the wind carried snow and ash through broken streets. By October, the weather began to turn. The mud of the steppe hardened into ice. The soldiers' breath froze in the air. Frostbite began to claim more lives than bullets. Still, the fighting continued. Both sides had orders, no retreat. For Hitler, Stalingrad had become an obsession. He demanded the city be taken at any cost. For Stalin, it was a sacred duty to defend it. Neither leader would allow withdrawal. Between their wills, hundreds of thousands of men were caught, consumed by a conflict that had long since lost reason. The civilians, those few who remained, hid in cellars, starving and sick. There was no food, No water, no warmth. Mothers melted snow for their children. The smell of death hung over the ruins. Night brought the cold, and with it, silence broken only by the distant thunder of guns. Through it all, Soviet reinforcements continued to cross the frozen Volga. They arrived with little more than rifles and faith. They fought knowing they might never return. The German advance slowed to a crawl. The city that was supposed to fall in days had held for months. Then, in November, the storm broke. Chapter 3. Winter of Blood and Ice. On November 19, 1942, the Red Army launched Operation Uranus, a massive counteroffensive that would change the course of the war. The Soviet plan was brilliant in its simplicity. Instead of attacking the heavily fortified city center, they struck the weaker flanks, manned by Romanian, Hungarian, and Italian divisions, guarding the German sides. Caught off guard in the freezing cold, these Axis allies collapsed under the assault. In just a few days, the Red Army advanced rapidly north and south of Stalingrad. By November 23rd, the two spearheads met at the town of Kalach, west of the city. The trap closed. The entire German Sixth Army, over 250,000 men, was surrounded. Inside the city, German soldiers found themselves cut off, encircled, and isolated. Supplies dwindled quickly. The Luftwaffe tried to deliver food and ammunition by air, but it was never enough. The freezing weather grounded many planes, and Soviet anti-aircraft fire claimed the rest. The soldiers on the ground began to starve. By December, temperatures dropped below -30 degrees Celsius. Frostbite blackened fingers and toes, weapons jammed in the cold, horses died, their frozen carcasses used for food, bread was rationed to crumbs, snow mixed with blood on the streets. The German High Command promised relief. Field Marshal von Manstein launched a rescue attempt, Operation Winter Storm, but it failed to break through the Soviet lines. The Sixth Army's fate was sealed. Inside Stalingrad, the situation descended into madness. Soldiers burned furniture for warmth. Wounded men froze to death in field hospitals buried under snow. Communication with the outside world broke down. Still, Hitler forbade surrender. He ordered Paulus to hold his position to the last bullet. The Soviet troops pressed closer. Street by street, they reclaimed the ruins. The once grand avenues of Stalingrad were now frozen rivers of debris. Tanks advanced over mountains of rubble. The sound of machine guns echoed through empty factories. In January 1943, the Red Army launched its final assault. Soviet artillery pounded the city without pause. The German lines crumbled. The Sixth Army, now reduced to a fraction of its strength, fought in small, desperate pockets. Ammunition ran out. Starvation finished what the cold had begun. The city that had been a fortress was now a graveyard. Chapter 4. The Fall of the Sixth Army. By the end of January, it was over. On January 31, 1943, Field Marshal Paulus, promoted by Hitler just a day earlier in hopes of inspiring defiance, was captured along with his staff in the ruins of the department store that served as his headquarters. For the first time in history, a German field marshal surrendered. The northern pocket held out for 2 more days. On February 2nd, the last shots were fired in Stalingrad. Silence fell over the frozen city. When the guns stopped, there was nothing left. The city that had once been home to 500,000 civilians was now a wasteland. Of the 91,000 German soldiers who surrendered, only about 5,000 would ever return home. The rest perished in captivity, disease, or exhaustion. Soviet losses were staggering. Over 1 million men killed, wounded, or missing. The scale of suffering defied comprehension. Stalingrad had not just been a battle. It was a turning point. The myth of German invincibility was shattered. The Red Army began its long march westward, driving the invaders back across the continent. The Volga, once a river of fire and blood, froze in quiet reflection of what it had witnessed. As the smoke cleared, the city revealed its scars. Buildings stood only as skeletons. The snow was gray with ash. Beneath the ruins lay countless bodies, soldiers of both armies, indistinguishable in death. For months, the wind carried the smell of decay. Spring would come, and with it, the first flowers growing among the ruins. but nothing could erase what had happened there. Stalingrad became a symbol, not of victory or defeat, but of endurance. It showed the world what total war truly meant. Cities turned to dust, armies consumed by winter, and men lost to madness and hunger. The soldiers who survived spoke little of it afterward. There were no heroes in the ruins of Stalingrad, only survivors of the frozen Inferno. The Volga flowed again when the ice melted, carrying with it the ashes of a city that had stood unbroken through the darkest winter in human history. The wind whispered through shattered walls, and snow fell softly on the bones below. The battle was over. The silence returned,